AITA for letting my kids loot my brother's house to prove my point. Here's the story of how my kids and I turned into a band of merry, modern-day, Lego-loving Vikings, and I guess I have to admit, I didn't stop them. So, let's set the stage a little. I'm a single mom with two teenagers who have inherited my love of tiny, pointless traditions. One of our absolute favorites is to leave little Lego dioramas around the house. Think of it like Easter eggs, but made out of minifigures and bricks that we've collected over the years. It's almost like an inside joke that lives in every room. You might open a kitchen drawer and find the Hulk and Darth Vader mid-battle, or head into the bathroom only to be greeted by Harry Potter riding a loot llama from Fortnite. The idea is silly, and honestly, that's what makes it so much fun for us. We've been doing it for ages, and at this point, it's a family tradition we all enjoy. It's not just about the Lego pieces themselves. It's about the moments we laugh when one of us stumbles upon a new little scene we didn't know was there. Last month, my brother and his family came to visit. Now, my brother and I have this friendly, low-level rivalry that I thought was just part of our sibling dynamic. Growing up, we'd have these little competitions: who could run faster, who could get the last piece of pizza, who could get away with borrowing something from the other without them noticing. You get the picture. As we got older, that competition never really went away. It just morphed into this under-the-surface thing. It's mostly funny, though sometimes it can get a bit much. Anyway, he and his wife brought along their 8-year-old son, who's my nephew and honestly a great kid, although he's got a little bit of a mischievous streak. But hey, that runs in the family, right? When they got to my house, my nephew was immediately fascinated by the Lego scenes we had set up. I mean, the kid was captivated. I could see the wheels turning in his head, and he followed my son around, asking questions about how we made each one and where we got the specific pieces. I didn't think much of it at the time because he's a curious kid, and I figured he was just excited to be part of our little Lego world. But then came the end of the weekend visit, and as I was tidying up the house, I realized something was missing. Specifically, Iron Man, Darth Vader, and our prized loot llama were nowhere to be found. Now, these aren't just random Lego pieces to us, they're like little characters in our household saga, and I knew my kids would be upset if they were actually gone for good. So, I asked my kids if they'd moved them or if they'd noticed anything, and they just looked at me, totally clueless. That's when the light bulb went on over my head. My nephew had probably pocketed them. Now, I didn't want to overreact because, hey, he's 8. I figured it was probably a case of ooh, shiny, and that he'd just gotten a little over-enthusiastic. No harm, no foul, right? I shot my brother a text. Hey, I think your little guy might have taken a few Lego minifigures home with him. Could you check and bring them back next time we see each other? I kept it light, assuming he'd understand and just give me a quick, oh, whoops. I'll bring them over, but instead, he hits me with, oh, that's just kids being kids. Haha, I'll bring them next time. I felt that twitch in my eye, but I told myself to let it slide. It was just Lego, after all. A couple of weeks go by, and my brother and I decide to meet up for coffee. I figured this would be the perfect opportunity for him to hand off the borrowed Lego, so I texted him beforehand, "Don't forget to bring the Lego." He replied with a thumbs up emoji, which seemed like a good sign. But when we met up, he didn't have anything with him. I asked him about it, and he just chuckled, saying, "Oh, I totally forgot. Next time, for sure." I don't know what it was about that chuckle, but it set something off in me. My kids had been asking about those missing pieces, and it was starting to feel like my brother just didn't care. Or worse, that he thought I was being ridiculous for wanting them back. So, I decided that if he was going to play the kids will be kids game, I could play too, and I'd do it with two teenagers who knew how to follow instructions to the letter. After our last exchange, I noticed he'd been quiet, almost suspiciously so. Usually, he'd text or call every now and then to check in or share some random joke, but it had been radio silence. Then, a week or so later, I got the invite. Another BBQ. A Saturday afternoon, just the whole family, no big deal. And that was when I knew this was my moment. He was inviting us back, probably thinking he'd test the waters, maybe see if I'd come with some sort of peace offering or at least tone down the theatrics. But, of course, I had no intention of doing that. Before we left, I made it perfectly clear to my kids that we'd have one rule. If we arrived and our beloved Lego wasn't sitting out, ready to be handed over without any funny business, then everything in that house was fair game. I watched my kids' faces light up with that mischievous, Viking glint again, and I could see the gears turning in their teenage brains. I didn't even have to explain further, they knew what was at stake. As we pulled into my brother's driveway, I felt a little spark of adrenaline. The battle lines had been drawn, and I knew we were in for round two. We walked in, and right away, I could sense that he thought this would be the perfect time to teach me a lesson. He'd set out a tray of drinks and snacks, all casual-like, with this easygoing smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. And right there, I knew. There was no Lego in sight, not even a hint of the bag he'd returned to us the week before, which was conspicuously absent. He might as well have been waving a giant red flag in front of a bull. I kept my expression neutral, feigned politeness, and asked, ever so casually, "So, you got our Lego?" He laughed it off, that same annoying, dismissive chuckle, and muttered something about me still being hung up on it, like this was all some minor thing that didn't matter. As he turned to chat with some other guests, I saw my kids exchange a look that said it all. They didn't even need to wait for me to say the words. The mission was clear, and as my brother turned his back, my kids disappeared into the house like two stealthy little commandos. While I stayed in the kitchen, keeping up the small talk with my brother and his wife, my kids were on a silent rampage, scouring every room and borrowing anything that wasn't nailed down. Every few minutes, I'd hear a faint clink from a cabinet, the soft opening of a drawer, the quick rustle of items being shifted around. I knew they were working their way through every nook and cranny, and I let them go at it. As far as I was concerned, this was entirely fair game. After all, he'd invited us over, and we'd made our expectations perfectly clear. At some point, I even managed to excuse myself for a moment to check on the kids, and I found my daughter in the living room with a handful of small electronics, grinning like a cat with a fresh catch. Meanwhile, my son was upstairs, carefully inspecting the contents of a few strategically chosen drawers in the guest room. I gave them both a quick nod, signaling that they were doing exactly what needed to be done. Imagine, my children even borrowed a dog from him. I could hardly contain my laughter when I saw it. Plausible deniability was the name of the game for me, so I didn't ask for details. I didn't want to know what they were taking. I just wanted them to leave no stone unturned. By the time dinner rolled around, I felt the energy shift. I could tell my brother was getting a bit antsy, like he knew something was off but couldn't quite put his finger on it. He kept glancing around the room, his gaze lingering a little too long on certain spots, like maybe he noticed a few things were missing but hadn't fully processed it. My kids and I kept it cool, though, playing the part of the polite, innocent guests. We laughed, we made small talk, we ate our burgers. It was like nothing was out of the ordinary. But underneath the surface, I knew we were all waiting for the moment when he'd realize what was happening. After we ate, my son gave me the subtle signal, a little nod, like a general confirming that the mission was complete. That was our cue to wrap it up. We thanked my brother for the food, made some quick goodbyes, and headed out the door. As we walked to the car, I could see him watching us, his eyes narrowing slightly. He probably thought something was off, but he didn't know for sure. He just knew we'd left a little too smoothly, a little too quietly. We were barely halfway home when my phone started blowing up. First, a call. I ignored it. Then a text popped up, followed by another call. Finally, I answered, feigning obliviousness, and my brother's voice came through in full panic mode. "A bunch of stuff is missing. The remotes, my earbuds, some chargers, one of the beer mugs, even a dog." He sounded like he was going to have a full-on meltdown. I could practically see him tearing his house apart, realizing just how much was gone. I kept my voice calm, almost too calm, and replied with a casual, "Oh, that's strange. I'll check with the kids, see if they borrowed anything. No worries, I'll box it all up and bring it over the next time we see each other. You know, kids will be kids, right?" There was a long pause on the other end, and I could almost hear him grinding his teeth as the reality of what was happening sank in. I could tell he knew exactly what I was doing, but he was trapped. He couldn't call me out without admitting he'd tried to brush off our Lego as just toys. Then, he muttered through clenched teeth, "No, I want my stuff back now." "This isn't funny. I just kept my cool, repeating, "Next time." No rush. There was a thick, uncomfortable silence, and then he let out a frustrated sigh before hanging up. Less than an hour later, my brother showed up at my doorstep, his face red as a beet and his hands full of Lego pieces. I could tell he'd done a mad scramble, gathering up anything that remotely resembled our stuff, just to make sure he returned every single piece. He'd even tossed in a few extras that clearly weren't ours, as if he wanted to be absolutely sure he hadn't missed anything. I handed him his stuff back with a satisfied smile, including the remotes, the electronics, and even his favorite beer mug and dog, which I think might have been the final straw. As I handed him everything, I made it very clear, this was the protocol moving forward if his son decided to take a few souvenirs from our house again. After that, he stomped off, muttering under his breath about how ridiculous it was to make a special trip to return toys, but I knew I'd gotten my point across. Later, my parents caught wind of the whole thing, and they called to lecture me about how there was a huge difference between an 8-year-old innocently taking a few Lego pieces and to teenagers ransacking their uncle's house. Maybe they're right, maybe I went overboard. But honestly, I have zero regrets. The look on my brother's face when he realized what had happened was priceless, and now he knows when it comes to family games, we don't play fair. And if he ever forgets, well, my kids and I will be more than happy to remind him. Update 1. After that last showdown with my brother, things were a bit tense. I thought the Lego heist would have sent a clear enough message, and to be honest, I didn't expect things to escalate. I figured we'd reached an unspoken truce after all. He got his precious electronics back, I got my Lego, and we all had a laugh, or at least I did. But apparently, my brother hadn't seen it that way. Instead of letting things settle, he took it personally and decided he needed to even the score. I just didn't know he'd be waiting for the perfect opportunity to make his move. Fast forward a few weeks, I'm at home with my kids, just an ordinary evening with nothing unusual going on. My son was upstairs, and my daughter was watching TV with me, when I suddenly heard the unmistakable rumble of a car engine outside. At first, I thought maybe it was one of the neighbors starting their car, but something didn't feel right. This sound wasn't distant, it was right outside, practically vibrating through the walls. My daughter looked at me, eyebrows raised, and without even saying anything, we both got up and moved toward the window. That's when I realized the sound wasn't coming from the street, it was coming from the garage. My heart dropped as I put two and two together. I swung open the front door and rushed outside, and that's when I saw it. My car was slowly rolling down the driveway, and in the driver's seat, clear as day, was my brother. He'd started my car, and he was pulling out of my driveway like he owned it. He saw me standing there, jaw practically hitting the pavement, and gave me a huge, smug grin. I could hear his laughter through the open window as he waved and drove off, my car rolling down the street with him at the wheel. In that instant, I knew he was out for revenge. This wasn't just some prank or petty payback. No, he decided to borrow my car as his way of getting even. My mind was racing as I watched him turn the corner and disappear down the street. 100 thoughts ran through my head all at once, and none of them involved just sitting back and letting him get away with it. He'd crossed a line, and I knew that if I didn't do something equally bold, he'd keep trying to one-up me. At first, I considered calling the police. After all, it's not every day that someone just drives off with your car from your own garage. But then I stopped myself, realizing that wasn't the answer. This was a family feud, a ridiculous sibling rivalry that had somehow spiraled out of control, and calling the cops felt like it would be giving him too much satisfaction. He wanted me to react. He wanted me to be rattled. And that's when it hit me, I needed to play this game on my terms, and I had just the plan. I grabbed my phone, but instead of dialing him up, I did a little digging. I knew my brother was smart enough not to go too far. He wouldn't risk being seen driving around with my car for long, and he'd probably keep it somewhere nearby just to make me sweat. He'd want to draw out this little power play, letting me wonder what condition he'd leave my car in or what hoops he'd make me jump through to get it back. But what he didn't know was that I had an ace up my sleeve. I'd had a tracking app installed on my car months ago after a string of minor thefts in the neighborhood. It was one of those little extras I hadn't told anyone about, and now it was about to come in handy. I opened up the app and sure enough, within a minute, I'd pinpointed my car's location. It wasn't far. He'd taken it to a local park about a mile away. I could imagine him there, sitting in the car, waiting for me to call and beg for it back, probably with some ridiculous terms of surrender lined up in his head. But this time, he'd underestimated me. I wasn't going to play the helpless victim. I was going to make sure this little escapade backfired spectacularly. I called my kids into the room and laid out the plan. They were as fired up as I was, and together, we gathered the supplies we need to make my brother's victory turn into a colossal failure. We grabbed every ridiculous costume we could find in the house: a Viking helmet, a clown wig, even some leftover Halloween face paint, and put together the most absurd outfits we could manage. The goal was to make our entrance as unforgettable as possible and to leave him utterly speechless. With everything ready, we piled into my daughter's car and headed toward the park. The whole drive there, I could feel my excitement growing. This wasn't just about getting my car back, it was about showing my brother that I wasn't going to roll over and let him win. By the time we pulled up to the park, we were all practically vibrating with anticipation. Sure enough, there he was, parked under a tree, just lounging in the driver's seat of my car with the windows down, probably thinking he'd just pulled off the prank of the century. I parked a short distance away, and we all got out of the car in full costume, sneaking around to make sure he didn't spot us. Then, on my signal, we charged forward, yelling at the top of our lungs and waving our arms like a band of lunatics. I wish I could have captured the look on his face as he whipped around to see a gang of costumed maniacs barreling toward him. His smirk melted into pure confusion, and before he knew it, we'd surrounded my car, forming a ridiculous circle and chanting nonsense phrases like we were performing some ancient ritual. He didn't know what to do. There he was, sitting in my car, trapped by his own prank, while we made a complete spectacle of the whole thing. I could see him glancing around nervously, probably hoping no one was around to witness this, because we were going all out. We danced around the car, chanting, singing, making a total scene, and he just sat there, his expression a perfect blend of annoyance and embarrassment. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he opened the door, threw up his hands, and stomped out, muttering something about how he'd had enough. But I wasn't quite done yet. As he walked past me, I casually mentioned that I'd installed a tracker on the car and had known where he was the entire time. The look on his face was priceless. He was completely deflated, realizing he'd never had the upper hand. My kids and I climbed back into the car, still wearing our ridiculous costumes, and drove home, laughing the whole way. My brother, on the other hand, walked back to his car empty-handed, probably plotting his next move but knowing he'd been thoroughly outplayed. When we got home, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction, knowing that I'd turned his own game against him. The score was settled, at least for now, and I could only imagine the stories he'd have to tell about the day he tried to steal my car, only to end up ambushed by a family of costumed maniacs. The rivalry might not be over, but one thing was clear: he'd think twice before messing with me again. Update 2. Later that week, after the whole spectacle with my brother and the car, my phone rang, and I saw it was my parents calling. I knew it was coming. I could only imagine what kind of story my brother had fed them by now. I picked up, trying to stifle my amusement because I had a feeling this call was about to get interesting. Sure enough, the first words out of my mother's mouth were, "Are you crazy?" I couldn't hold it in and immediately started laughing. The whole situation had been absurd, after all. But my mother wasn't amused. She snapped, "This is not funny." My laughter only got worse. I couldn't help myself. The absurdity of it all was just too much. Here we were, fully grown adult siblings in our 40s, and yet we'd been dragged back to the days of sibling squabbles, pranks, and ridiculous rivalries. And now, we dragged our parents into it. As if on cue, my father's voice chimed in, sounding exasperated as he explained that my brother had called them, apparently in a state of total indignation, and told them everything. Or at least, what he thought was everything. That was what really got me. My brother had spun his tale to our parents in true dramatic fashion, apparently without including the key detail that made my reaction make sense: the fact that he'd taken my car. I could picture him conveniently leaving out that one little fact, probably spinning it to make himself look like the innocent victim of my insanity. In his version, I was the one who had showed up at his house in costumes, acting ridiculous and embarrassing him in public. No mention of the car, no mention of him actually driving off with it, just him, being an innocent guy minding his own business, when suddenly his sister and her kids decided to bring the circus to his house. I laughed even harder, imagining the scene my brother must have created over the phone. My parents, meanwhile, sounded genuinely distressed. They went on about how my brother had called them in a huff, describing how we'd ambushed him in some kind of elaborate, costume-driven display. They said he'd been embarrassed, bewildered, and utterly blindsided. My mother started in with that serious tone only moms can manage, like I'd committed some grave offense against the family name, and I could barely catch my breath from laughing. I asked them what they thought about the fact that he had stolen my car. The line went silent for a second. Apparently, that was news to them. My brother, in all his self-righteous storytelling, had conveniently left out the crucial fact that he had taken my car from my own garage without a word. I could hear my parents scrambling to process this new bit of information, and the realization dawned on them slowly. They had been fed a carefully curated version of events, but they were starting to understand that the story had a few missing pieces literally. My father sounded confused, almost like he couldn't believe it, and my mother just sighed. They didn't know what to say. As I explained how he borrowed my car to teach me some kind of lesson and driven off with it, I could feel their exasperation building. They both took turns groaning and muttering things under their breath, like they didn't even know what to do with the fact that their grown children were still behaving like this. They must have been picturing us, two 40-somethings, still caught up in sibling pranks and one-upmanship, acting like middle school rivals rather than adults with kids of our own. Once I finished telling them the whole story, complete with my own triumph of the costumed ambush, they fell quiet again. I think it was starting to dawn on them just how deep this rivalry went and how committed both of us were to outdoing the other. I waited, curious about what they'd say, almost expecting them to pick sides, maybe even get a little laugh out of it. But, oh no. Instead, my mother just sighed and declared, in that disappointed tone only moms can pull off, that we were both crazy. She said we were acting like children and needed to grow up already. It was the kind of statement she used to make when my brother and I were 12 and fighting over something dumb like who got to sit in the front seat. Only now, we were in our 40s, and we dragged our own kids into the mix. It was probably the first time in years that I'd felt genuinely chastised by my parents, but that just made me laugh even more. I mean, the whole situation was ridiculous. Here we were, a family known for keeping it relatively together, and now we had devolved into some kind of comic spectacle of pranks, stolen property, and elaborate ambushes. But my parents weren't laughing. They told me they didn't want to hear about any more ridiculous antics and said they'd be calling my brother next to give him a piece of their mind. I could almost hear my mother pinching the bridge of her nose, probably imagining that our family was turning into a real-life sitcom. My brother, on the other hand, probably hadn't expected any of this to reach our parents, let alone backfire on him. I could imagine him trying to play the part of the aggrieved, mature sibling, only to have our parents find out that he was the one who had instigated the whole thing by pulling off the car heist in the first place. Part of me wondered how he'd handle their phone call, knowing that his story had crumbled and that my parents were now privy to the full, ridiculous truth. After I hung up, I sat there, a little amused and a little chastened. Maybe we had gone a bit too far, maybe, but there was also a part of me that couldn't help but enjoy the absurdity of it all. It felt like we were reliving the days when my brother and I would concoct elaborate pranks on each other just to see who would crack first. Only now, we dragged our own kids into it, and the stakes had gotten so much higher. As much as my parents' disapproval had shaken me a bit, I couldn't shake the feeling that my brother wouldn't let it go either. I knew him too well. Now that our parents were involved, there was no way he'd let this be the end of the saga. I figured he'd be planning his next move, probably stewing over how to get back at me without tipping off our parents. Part of me wanted to let things cool down, but another part was already thinking about what my next move would be. If my brother wanted to play games, then games he would get. And this time, I'd make sure my revenge was both foolproof and unforgettable. As much as our parents thought we were crazy, I knew I'd never back down from a challenge, not when it came to my brother.